Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Chirping Zebras. I'm Mark Riley alongside Gino Binder Jr.
How's it going?
And we have a great show tonight. We have a great guest coming on that we'll get to in a minute. But the topic for tonight, before we bring our special guest on, a lot of people talk. I'm sure you've had the question about fighting.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on fighting as a referee? What's the worst fight you had? How you approach the fighting and all that good stuff.
I think it's good for the game, when it's done properly, right? When kids just go out in junior hockey especially, right? Like I remember when I was out in the USHL working, the USHL, they'll fight when it's appropriate, right? And then you go down the lower level junior leagues, they're allowed to fight, right? Back then they got a 5-minute major and that was it.
That was it.
And then they got to come back out, get another fight, and then they get the game. So they got one free one. So you tell a couple of 16, 17-year-old kids they got a free fight, they're going to go take it. So, a couple of those times that's when it's not like they just stage fighting, they're just doing it just to fight. Right. That's when I don't think it's good for the game, right?
Yep.
Like when you need it, when you're in a tough game, the sticks are up high, people are getting run, you need someone to protect those skilled players, right? Like, I don't know, Netflix has that documentary, I'm actually in it. And
no kidding.
Yeah, I'm in it. Yeah, I got Bobby Farnham by the neck, and I'm like just kind of dragging him. But no, he was great to deal with. Sometimes you need a fisticuff in a game.
Well, and that's the thing. My thing has always been, and for the non-hockey purist, right? They see it as just violence. They don't get that it's not. It's not senseless violence. Right. There's a reason for it. There's a reason why Wayne Gretzky was never. You never took a run at Wayne Gretzky because you knew Marty McSorley was going to come out and beat the bag out of you.
So the point of that whole Netflix documentary was, the lady on there was a British lady, and she was great. She was like, like fighting in hockey, like you run the risk of getting hurt and this and that. But their star players are now running the risk. Sidney Crosby has more concussions than all the
McSorley
fighters
probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So it just kind of flip-flopped, right? Like, so now you got guys taking runs at people and this and that. And even nowadays in the NHL, you see more college players now in the NHL, right? Before they get up there, now you have to play and answer for your stick up high, right? Like you slash someone or, you carry your stick a little high, get somebody, you got to pay the price.
Yeah, you always could tell. You always could tell, like back in the Coast League, who just came out of college, right?
Yeah, that was the best.
Because you get that kid out there and he's got his stick up or he's hitting people with the hands in the face because in college they got cages.
Yep.
And next thing you know, they get the bag beat out of him. And that kid learned really quick to keep his hands down. And I think now in the NHL, say someone takes a run at Pasternak and, not that the Bruins really have anyone, but if someone goes out to confront that, and if they jump the guy, they end up getting penalized to the point where they end up going on the penalty kill.
Right.
Which it just makes no sense to me that now, like you said, grabbing someone and beating them up for no reason or grabbing a goal scorer and doing it, completely unnecessary.
Right.
But you take a run at my player, I should be able to go over and make you answer that.
Right.
The Quebec Major Junior League, they took it out completely.
Right.
So and everyone, it's a big debate within hockey, and do people want to watch violence on TV, and is it taken away from the sport? I know friends of mine who are basketball fans. Our boys there at AOA Studios, they're basketball people, and they're like, we love hockey fights because you don't see that in other sports.
You can't; it's not allowed. Right?
And baseball players don't know how to fight. Let's be honest. And football players, there's really no point to it. And soccer, well, I'll just leave soccer alone. Yeah. So there's a reason for it. There's a place for it. And I think our woke society is everyone wants to get a trophy. No one wants to, let little Johnny watch.
Right.
I won't bring up the Paul Newman line in Slapshot when he talks to the owner about letting a kid watch a hockey game. But, it's something that I think is important to the game. Now, we were refs. We wore the bands, so we didn't have to get involved with the fighting. Everyone says, "Wow, how is it like to break up a fight?" We didn't break them up because the linesmen would go in and break, and they still do. The linesmen break up the fights. Referees sit back, watch. I always was worried about the moneymaker here. I didn't want my face getting hit by accident. And and everyone said, what's the worst fight? I mean, we've had line brawls. We talked about that last episode. We watched one of yours. One of my worst ones was in Columbus. Johnny O'Brien and Steve Barton, who's actually in the NHL now, linesman. They were my linesmen. And early on in the first period, Johnny takes a puck to the eye. Got like 42 stitches, right? I mean, he just got opened up.
Was he wearing a bucket or just no visor?
We didn't wear visors back then. Right. We had no visors. The only league that made you wear a visor was the Western Hockey League.
Okay.
When you went out there. So he gets smoked and gets taken off. So now we're doing a two-man, one linesman, one referee, which was fine. But the two teams hated each other, and it was Columbus and Dayton who absolutely hated each other. So, scrums after every whistle. Next thing you know, we have a fight at center ice. Two guys, they strip down, bare chests, and start wailing each other. So now I have to go in. Now, Steve Barton was smaller than me, not a big guy, right? And Johnny's like 6'4", right? So, he always loved him out there.
Yeah.
It's like trying to grab a seal. It's this half-naked, sweaty dude. And, of course, they both fall, and as they fall, one guy's skate comes up, slices one of the other guy's arms.
Jesus.
So there's blood everywhere. It looks like it was just a massive shit show. And so the kid goes in to get stitched.
Yeah.
Johnny's still getting stitched. So Johnny says to the kid, what's going on out there? He goes, it's a complete dumpster fire. And he goes, you better get back out there to help Riley. Sure enough, before the period ended, we're in a massive scrum. People are punching each other, and O'Brien comes out. Hey, boys, be careful of my eye. Watch out. Be careful of the eye. I just got it stitched up. Everyone's like, what the fuck are you doing back here?
Right.
Ended it.
Hockey
there
player.
wasn't one more fight.
Yeah,
there wasn't one more fight.
Right.
Because no one wanted to. Johnny was that respected. No one wanted to bump his eye.
Oh, that's awesome.
But that was the craziest night I had because I had to break up a fight.
Right.
And it was just, it was just ridiculous. So, so that's our take on fighting. I mean, I'm sure you had a few.
Yeah, I've had a couple. I had a
bats.
bloody Sunday in Worcester one day. B-Mac, he got caught. He had to leave the ice. Same deal, right?
Yep.
Brian McDonald.
B-Mac. Oh yeah, B-Mac.
Yeah, B-Mac. He's
I love that kid.
He was the best worker.
I did a ton of games with him in the East Coast, in the ECAC.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah, he was the best.
He always drove too.
I know. He did. He liked driving. He had a nicer car than everyone. That's why.
Yeah. So exactly.
Well, before we bring on the guests, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors. Again, Moby Cuts, our favorite barbershop right here up in Beverly, with our boy Eric and Cam, and go see them for sure and get yourself your lid busted. And also Referees Crease, who the largest assigner and developer of referees in really in the East Coast.
Yep, in the East Coast, and we just keep taking on more and more work, so it just doesn't end. Yep.
So we want to welcome our first ever guest on Chirping Zebras, and when we talked about who we should have on first, well, it was a no-brainer. This guy was the guy we wanted to get. He's the only American born to play and referee in the NHL. He has 1,010 games refereed in the NHL, 49 playoff games. He has 2 All-Star games, 2 Canada Cups. And not only all that as a referee, but when he was playing for the Quebec Nordiques, he was the only player to fight 3 Bruins at the Garden one night. And as he calls it, it's the Dorchester hat trick. We want to welcome a man with huge hands, Paul Stewart. Welcome to Chirping Zebras, Paul.
Welcome.
Great to be with you both. I'm only missing from Southie now Kelly's Landing and a box of clams.
Yes.
We can arrange that, actually.
I think the restaurant moved and they're now down in
down in Hanover.
Well, there's one there, but there's one in Florida.
Oh, okay.
Down by where we would go and do the Florida Panthers games, and we would stay on the 17th Street Causeway. And I happened into Kelly's Landing one day, and I was right at home.
Oh, that's awesome. Gotta love that. Home cooking.
If you don't like Kelly's, there's something wrong with you. That's what I say.
Yeah.
So, Paul, before we get into one of the topics we talked about before we brought you on, how did you get into refereeing? Because you were a player, right? And you got into it. It's just such a unique story.
Well, it's interesting. Like your co-host, whose father was a referee. We all want to honor our parents, especially if we respect them. And my case was even past my father, who was a fellow that refereed 35 years college hockey and amateur hockey with high schools in the state tournament. He did 19 Beanpot championships, and he had his father, who was the first American to referee in the NHL and had been refereeing pro hockey since 1920, when he was the assistant rink manager at the Boston Arena, well before the Boston Garden. And they had a team called the Boston Tiger Cubs, and they played in the Can-Am League. And my grandfather was monitoring the horses and the buckets of water, how they resurfaced back in those days. And inevitably, they needed a referee, and he could skate. He was coaching MIT. He was coaching Milton Academy. He coached at Harvard baseball and BU baseball in the off seasons. In the summertime, he was a professional ball player. And so athletics were really a family affair. And from his inspiration, my father went on from English high school to Lawrence Academy to Notre Dame, World War II, 42 months in the Air Force, and then came home. He was a coach at UMass, which was the GI Extension Bill School, and he coached hockey there. He was refereeing like his dad, who in the summer, by the way, my grandfather was also a major league umpire. So he did the World Series 4 times. He did 4 All-Star games, and he did 9 Stanley Cup finals. So you watch how people respect them, and you walk into the arena, Boston Garden, and it's not anything more than trying to emulate what they've done. And you admire them so much and love them that the idea of what they're doing seems very noble. And I was always taught that hockey was like a big pizza. You take one slice, which is playing, the next would be coaching, and the third would be officiating. And those are the on ice aspects. And then, of course, you've got the general manager, and you've got the rink staff and the support. I drove a Zamboni when I was 12 at the Boston Arena. I used to help Joe Sutherland put the nets on in between periods. And just people ask me all the time, why am I so happy when I'm in a rink? Because that's where my friends are. And that's what drove me. And after I got to that age where my hands weren't as quick, and it was a predominantly Canadian game, and it was tougher for me to find teams to play for, and I had to fight as a minority player. They weren't and people look at me and say, oh, you're a white guy. Yeah, but there are minorities in many ways, because you get almost excluded because you're not Canadian. I played for Edmonton, I played for Cincinnati, and I played for Quebec. And then I went with Buffalo Sabres. I was with the Rangers. And more often than not, there were only 1 or 2 Americans in the dressing room. And I played on teams where you'd go in and they wouldn't talk to you, or they'd throw your equipment in the toilet, or they did all sorts of stuff. And they found out after a while that doing that wasn't healthy for them. So I used to spar at the New Garden gym. I sparred with Bill Duffy, who taught me how to fight. I sparred with Vinnie Marino, who was a welterweight. He introduced me to the Petronelli brothers. I used to run the dunes with Marvin Hagler. I sparred with him. I sparred with Joe Frazier when I was living in Philadelphia. I sparred with Aaron Pryor when I was playing in Cincinnati. And I actually fought Neil Sheehy once in a Jimmy Fun exhibition at on the rocks down on Cape Cod. And that was one thing you had to understand, that I had to learn how to do what I needed to do to buy time and space for myself to be able to improve, because we played 15 or 20 games in high school, and the Canadians coming down to the U.S. to play at BU and Northeastern and other schools, they were playing 100, 110 games. So we didn't have the experience. And there were very few guys like Robbie Fatorik or Tim Sheehy that were just outstanding players wherever they were born. And for me, I mean, I wasn't any different. And look at the list. Nicky Fotiu, New York Rangers.
Yeah.
Knuckles Nyland, Montreal. Kurt Walker, Toronto. Paul Holmgren, Philadelphia. Jack Carlson in Minnesota. I mean, we were all Americans.
Right.
And we were all the tough guys.
That's it. It's really fascinating that you bring that up, because that's something that I think a lot of people forget, that the league now is not like it was back then, where it was predominantly Canadian. And even in the referee ranks, it was like that for a long time. They only had so many Americans, and the rest were all Canadians.
I showed up to the NHL training camp in 1983 as an invited guest, as a trainee. There was Mark Fawcett from Springfield, myself, and a couple other guys, Tom Monahan from New Jersey, and already established was Mike Noeth. But there were three linesmen, Kevin Collins, Springfield Hockey Hall of Fame, Gord Brossica from Baltimore, whose father was an off-ice official with the Baltimore, used to be the Baltimore Clippers and the American Hockey League. And the last one was Dan Shakti, who lived in Madison, Wisconsin, and, you know, worked a lot of games out that way. And you know, he was a good linesman. And the fact is that if you go down the list and think about the Stanley Cup Finals, which the league's 100 years old, there have only ever been 4 Americans that worked the finals, and 2 of them were for Boston.
Yep.
My grandfather was the first. Bill Chadwick from New York, who later went on and was the color voice of the Rangers, was the second, who's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. My grandfather's in the U.S. Hall of Fame. The third one was Dennis LaRue, and last but not least, another South Boston native, which is Chris Rooney. And, you know, all of them were good officials. I never got to the finals because the fellow that I worked for after John McCauley and Scotty Morrison left, McCauley died. He's dad of Wes McCauley, and such an inspiration to me that we named our son Macaulay John Stewart after him.
Yeah.
That people don't understand that when I worked the Canada Cup in '87 in the finals, I had never refereed a game in the NHL.
And what a picture that is.
And John McCauley and Rennie Fizell, president of the IIHF, they put me out there because they had seen me work and they had confidence in me, and they didn't care what passport I brought. What mattered to them was, could I do the game and control the game without taking the game away from the players.
Stu, you're one of the best.
In Hamilton in '87, they say, and hockey aficionados say this, it was the greatest game ever played. And I take pride that I was on the ice with all the Russian stars, Fetisov, Larionov, Krutov, Kaminsky, all of those fellas. And on the power play for the Canadians was Bourque and Messier and Lemieux. And you look at those fellas and Grant Fuhrer in the net, and you say, you know, for a guy that wasn't a great player, and a lot of people think I wasn't a very good referee, I can walk in a room and these guys know me.
Right.
And I take pride in that.
You
because
should.
I earned the respect that I hadn't gotten when I was going to school here in Boston or at the University of Pennsylvania. And it was a fire that burned inside of me. And that night in Boston, when I showed up for Quebec Nordiques, they were after Fedoruk. And I stopped in front of the dressing room before the game started at 5:00. And I told Bobby Miller, go in and tell those guys, if they want Fedoruk, come on out and we'll start it right here in the lobby. We don't need 14,909. We'll do it right here. We'll see who's got what. And I'll take you all on. And Cashman and O'Reilly came to the door and they thought I was nuts. In the warm-up, Cashman speared me. They were going clockwise. We were going counterclockwise. He speared me, and I two-handed him right over the shoulder. And so I counted that as my first howdy do to that team. And then it was O'Reilly, and then Jonathan, and then Secord. And I didn't even know who Secord was. I was figuring Wensink. But I had fought him in the American League, Rochester, and I never had any fear because I knew that I was well prepared, and I thought that this was my destiny.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
And what's great about that story is a lot of people don't know about that Cashman interaction in the warm-ups.
Well, I think he was sending a message to me, which is, we'll take care of you, no problem. But he didn't realize, and as I said, when I worked in Russia to the president of Russia, Putin, when he said, you don't seem afraid and you don't blink. Are you Russian? I said, no, I'm from Dorchester. Look it up.
That's awesome.
There are only two ways to go home from St. Greg's, Morton Street, and I had to fight the kids from that project to make sure I got my sneakers home. And if I went River Street, I had to fight the kids from that project. And between the two of them, they'd steal your lunch money or your sneakers. So you had to be kind of tough to hang in there. Plus, I worked hard to get there, and there was no one that was going to take that away from me.
And wasn't that your first NHL game?
It was my first regular season NHL game. I, of course, had played in quite a few exhibition games when I was with the Rangers. I played against the Islanders. In fact, Clark Gillies one night, well after he retired, was in a bar down in Fort Lauderdale, not too far from Kelly's Landing. And he walked around the bar with a beer in his hand, and he handed it to me, and he said, I want to ask you a question. He said, you fought everybody on my team. You fought them all. I said, yeah. He said, but we never fought. Why is that? And I said, I admired you as a player. I thought you were tough and honest, and you stayed inside the code. I said, and the other thing is, I'm kind of smart, and I had seen you fight, and I didn't want to get killed. And he said to me, yeah, and I've seen you for a long time. He said, I would have had to kill you 9 times because you kept getting up.
That's
awesome.
awesome.
The Dorchester in you.
Right.
Yeah, but when you see guys like Clark Gillies or Gretzky or fellas like that, when I went into the Hall of Fame, that your dad came to the dinner,
Yep.
Gino, and Jack Carlson called me and congratulated me. And the next guy that called me was Wayne Gretzky.
No kidding.
And I get a tremendous degree of pride because I think I helped open the door for guys like Chris Rooney.
You did, 100%.
No question.
And Wayne was just on Spittin' Chicklets, and like I was listening, and you know the thing that brought me back was that 87 game when you're pointing, you're in between Gretzky and Lemieux, and you're right on the goal line, and you're just sitting there pointing. And I was listening to him talk about that, and like hockey people, they're talking about hockey. You came right to my mind, and that's one of the greatest moments in sports in hockey.
Well, as I tell a lot of my young officials, and I'm sure you tell your stable of officials the same thing, positioning sells calls. And when you're in a game, no matter which it is, whether it's a game at the Quincy Youth Arena or you're in Hamilton, Ontario, and Russia's playing the Canadian team, you want to make sure that there's no excuses to be used or had. And the other thing is that they can't turn and blame you. If you're in great position, no one can argue.
Right.
And I think that, and I said this to Fran Rosa, who was at the game, the God rest his soul, the great writer for the Globe. I told him I was like George Patton. I was in the right place at the right time with the right equipment, meant to be there.
Right.
And I feel that because of the confidence that John McCauley and Scotty Morrison from the NHL and Rene Fizel had in me, that I could never let them down. When that game was over, and I had a knee operation in July of that year, and this game was in early September, McCauley came in the room after the game and he kicked my foot. I had my head down. I was taking my skates off, and I looked up and he said superb, and then he said follow me into the washroom, and I did. He said to me, the committee, the Russians and the Canadians, Alan Eagleson and such, Tikhonov, they want you to referee Tuesday night. And I was like, wow. I mean, I'm thinking about the short end. It was $1,500.
That's insane.
As long as the check doesn't bounce, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty good check. And McCauley said to me, you're not going to work. He said, because you don't know how many people didn't want you to make it. He said, and you've proven tonight, just as Scotty and Rene and I felt, that you're a good referee and you're going to get your next 80 games in the NHL with me. So and my dad told me to, anything McCauley said, you follow it. He was like my Yoda, my mentor in many ways, a great guy. And the world was robbed when he passed away so suddenly. But I went to the game the next night, 2 nights later, and watched Koharski work. And I got $500 for sitting there, so it wasn't a bad night after all. And there was a cute blonde sitting behind me.
Always a bonus.
Yeah, there's always an upside of everything.
It's so funny. As I listen to you, there's so many things I'd love to get into. And one of the things I think, when we talked about in the last episode, back when you refereed, and there's no question you opened doors for guys like Chris. I mean, I only spent a week in the NHL, but, you opened the door. And I didn't mention that in 2018, you were inducted into the USA Hockey Hall of Fame. Your speech was second to none. I mean, I've watched it multiple times on YouTube. If you haven't seen that or heard that, you got to go out and do it. That's my advice to everyone. But back in the day, when there was one referee and 2 linesmen, there was a personality, yourself. Like when you walked in the building, everyone knew what they were getting. When Van Hellemond walked in, when McCreary walked in. And that's kind of lost now with the 4 guys, and this guy might do it one way, this guy might not do it. And we talked about it in the first episode. What are your thoughts on the 3-man system versus that 4-man system now?
Well, Fraser and I, along with Kevin Collins and Pat DiPuzzo, did the first modern era 2-referee, 2-linesman system.
Okay.
And the morning of the game, we were in the hotel directly across from the Madison Square Garden, the Penta. Glenn Miller wrote about it. Pennsylvania 65000, the phone number, and 212 Pennsylvania 65000. And we hadn't even been instructed on how we were to do it, to do the 4-man system. But we figured out that the 4-man was really a 2-man system like we had used in junior and high school hockey, where the referee down low dropped the puck and stayed and monitored the neck, and the high referee covered the blue line and covered any interferences. And there were no linesmen, so we also had to do icings and offsides. Long story short, we figured out that it was like a tandem, that we could work one way and the other and split the ice in half. And if I got in trouble, he'd move across the blue line to watch in the areas where I wasn't able to see, and so on. And I think that it went along, and a lot of people say, why did they need it? Because 1 and 2 seemed to be working. They needed it because they took the red line out. And the fact of the matter is that there was no way, any way, referee, and I was a good skater. And you can't last in pro hockey 28 years on the ice, as I did, without being able to skate. And, before that, 3 years of college hockey and 5 years of prep school, I could skate, and I worked at it. And Andre Boudrias, the coach in Quebec, assistant coach, and Jacques Demers, they really worked with me and made me a better skater and strong. I was strong on my feet. And I think that in the modern era, because of the way the game is being played and how they're being told to referee, you don't see the players as much with the referees at the net. They stand back in the corners. You don't see the players interacting with the referees as much anymore because they all have helmets and visors on. So there's not that interaction, and then there's not that personality recognition. But the most important thing is that they took away the on-ice decisiveness that we all had to have because they went to the replay. And they went to the replay originally in Indianapolis in an exhibition game with Dave Newell refereeing, where the reason for replaying, and they put a camera above the net, was to decide whether the puck went in or not. And that was it. And then it's morphed into all these other different things. And the guy on one side lifted his ankle 6 inches off the ice, but he's breaking the plane. And it took away the opportunity to be decisive and to be instrumental, and also to put it on the line. I mean, as I said to people, you pay me to judge, let me judge.
Right.
And I think that it's the one aspect of professional hockey, and even in some of the college hockey now, that it takes the electricity out of the building. You sit there for 2-3 minutes, and people sit there, and maybe it's good for concession sales, but it's brutal for the spark. And I doubt you'd see nowadays, a player like they had happen score 3 goals in 59 seconds, because now after the goal, they got to replay it to see if it's a good goal or not.
Right.
Yeah, we talked about that too, about how when I came up, there was no video. You had to make a decision.
If you have the slightest instinctive feel that something's wrong, as soon as that puck enters the net, look at the goalie. Because if they think that they got screwed, they're going to turn and look at you right away. That's your first telltale. That's the first thing that should spark a little bit of curiosity in you. And now, they had rules that I never followed them, but you couldn't go behind the net. And, my old man told me skates are expensive and they're meant to take you from here to there. So get where you can see. Get your money's worth out of those blades.
You used to always say, take the open ice. Take the open ice.
Yeah. And I think an illustration of that is something that even Gretzky and we had our moments together. And I tell you, I played against him his first game in the WHA. He was playing for Indianapolis and I was playing for Cincinnati. And I leaned over the boards and I said to him, "Hey kid," he was 17. I said, "Hey kid, you got a note to be out this late?"
That's awesome.
Became very good friends with his wife and his mom and dad, God rest their souls. They were, I went to their house. They honored me by inviting me to their tournaments for blind children. And of course, who's better to have there than a referee? It's supposed to be blind all the time, But it was interesting. I was in LA one night and I was aside of the net, and then I backed off. I did a little spinorama and I backed off and I kept bumping into Gretzky, and I bumped into him maybe 4 or 5 times. And I was 220 pounds and he was 170 or 175. And when I bumped him, he'd have to move. And finally he said, "God damn it, Stu, get the hell out of my way." I said, "Where do you want me to stand? It's open ice." He says, "That's where I stand." So I always, my next book is going to be about the fun stories of things. Everybody always wanted to know what we talked about on the ice. And right. I have a vivid memory, even though Bettman thought I shouldn't be on the concussion lawsuit. And I said to him, "Well, I'm getting 20,000 Canadian. I'm getting the Gordie Howe pension, 1,000 for every year I served. And it's Canadian." I said, "So don't you have a problem going to sleep at night worrying about me? I'm going to have a yard sale every 2 weeks." And he says, "You're so articulate and you remember everything. And, you don't seem like you have any issues with concussion." I said, "Well, thank you, Frank."
That is absolutely
That's pretty good.
Delicious.
But, the funny part is, and I've faced death a couple times with having had the cancer, and other I was in a plane crash too, but it's been a marvelous life. It's Jimmy Stewart. It's a wonderful life. And, I've achieved the things that I've wanted to achieve. And now I like your co-host and passing the torch to the next generation. And I'm constantly talking to coaches to tell them to get their players to think about refereeing and trying to find women that can do it, because we need the next generation to come along. And it's not easy, because even yesterday I was watching a prep school game and the coach told the referee, he called a timeout because he wanted to let him know what a horse's ass he was. And I waited a day. I'm going to call that coach tomorrow and I'm going to tell him, you're the reason, and that comment is the reason why we lose people.
Yes.
That abuse was unnecessary, and it's also below the standards of ethics of what a coach should be all about. And I'm going to tell him, you do that again and you're going to sit. And I will sit him, and it won't bother me a damn bit. And I'm going to tell you right now, people have often said, oh, I was a frictional guy and I was controversial and everything. I only had 2 colors in my crayon box, black one and a white one.
Right.
And it's yes or no. And we play the game with ethics and pride and dignity, but enthusiasm and courage. And I think that those things necessarily, parents are paying $1,500 for a pair of skates. They feel they're entitled and that their son or daughter is going to make the National League or the Women's Pro League. Guess what? 0.5%. And I was one of those 1% guys that will make it to the National Hockey League or even college hockey.
Now, Stu, I remember you said to me one time, you never benched a coach in the NHL.
I never benched a coach in the National Hockey League. I actually benched, I gave 4 bench minors.
4 bench minors? Okay.
4. The first one was to a teammate of mine, Robbie Fatorik, who I had lived with, and he wouldn't put his team out on the ice, a Maine-New Haven game. And it was funny because Maine was not a good team and New Haven was LA's farm team and they were doing well. And Billy O'Dwyer was the captain, and with 6 seconds to go, there was a fight. I was right there. The players had to go to their benches back in those days. So Billy came over and said, Robbie wants to talk to you. I said, we got 6 seconds. I'll talk to him after the game's over. He said he thinks that should have been a match penalty for kneeing. And I turned, I said, I was 5 feet from it. He's 500 feet from it. Tell him, put the team out here. Let's get going. He wouldn't put the team out. So I'm talking over O'Dwyer like he's a tennis net, saying to Fatorik, you don't put your team out, I'm going to drop the puck. And Marty Demers was the linesman.
Oh, Marty's awesome.
Yeah.
And I said to him, drop the puck. He goes, I'm not dropping it. I said, give it to me. I took it right to center ice, right at the dot. Dougie Brown was the player for Maine. I put it down like Bagger Vance put the ball on the tee.
That's excellent.
And 6 seconds to go, I put the puck down and boom, he shot it in the empty net. And of course, the guy up in Toronto that didn't like what I did was the guy that eventually took over after Macaulay died. And it was just another reason he hated me. So Fatorik got the first. Then in Winnipeg one night, a player for Winnipeg ran into a player from Washington, Kyprios, and the player from Winnipeg got knocked flat, out cold, fell on the ice, broke his nose, blood everywhere. And it was a good hit. It wasn't a hit, but he got knocked out with the hit and fell, and it wasn't a head hit. And I was right there. And the coach of Washington, Brian Murray, had a lisp, and he kept saying, Paul, and I was getting spit on all of them. So I said to him, knock it off. I said, it was a clean hit. Yeah, but they went after my player and Paul. And I finally banged him with 2. Boom. So that's my second one. The third one happened back to back with another guy I played hockey with, Ron Wilson. He was out of Providence. his father was the coach of, had been the coach at Providence Reds. Richmond Robbins had been around for a long time. And of course, Ronnie played at Providence College and played in Toronto and was a good player. But he was coaching, and he got a little over the top with me. And the game's over, and he called me something, and I banged him with a bench minor. I mean, the game's over. The score was out of hand, and we're in Chicago, and he told me I was a no good lollipop sucker, if you know what I mean.
We appreciate you keeping it clean.
The next night, we're in St. Louis. I back to back. They went from Chicago to St. Louis, and I got him back to back. And he apologizes to me, but then in the third period, they're losing, and I hit him with a penalty late in the game, and all of a sudden I'm a lollipop sucker again. And so I banged him again, and I told him, don't ever talk to me again. And I hadn't talked to him until he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he's had some health issues and all of that. You know, you forgive and you forget, and friction's part of hockey. I remember Dick Umili, when I was running the college hockey, came after me, UNH coach, and a month later we're at the coaches convention and standing there having a beer. And the guy I worked for, the commissioner of the ECAC, he couldn't believe that we'd be sitting there being friends. And I said, we live for these little moments under the stands. It's all part of it.
Right.
And then afterwards, you know, if you're a true pro, you let it go. I'm in the Hockey Hall of Fame, US.
Yep.
I'm also in 4 others. And I think that, you know, you have a certain dignity about that aspect of being chosen to be in that elite group or those elite groups. And I never let my standards down. To me, the most important thing was to make sure the players were safe and sound. And I didn't care what people thought. I just cared that I gave, and I said it in my speech, and I'll talk about that in a second. I gave you 100% every night. I didn't give you 110. I hear coaches say, you gotta give me 110%. You can't. You can give you what you got, but you're a failure if you give 90. If you don't show up and play it right to the hilt, and excuses if one loses. Don't tell me, oh, I got my fingers sore, or I hurt my knee, or I had a cold. You know, that's all bull. I was on chemo in 98 after I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon and liver cancer. And they told me I had 6 months to live. I went to the cemetery and bought a plot next to my father and my grandfather. And I told the guy at the cemetery, this is ecologically a great choice for the people. He said, why is that? I said, because they can go to the Corb pub down there in West Roxbury, have a dozen beers, and come out to the grave and get 3 referees in a row and save gas. And they said, the fella said to me, and my doctors said the same, you have a unique way of dealing with grievous information. I turned, I said, you can fear death or you can embrace it, because it's going to come. And I'm going to go out with my head up high, and I'm going to make sure that I have at least 6 friends. And the guy said to me, well, why 6 friends? I said, that way you don't have to rent them when they carry you out of the church.
Sound advice right there.
Pretty good.
But, you know, it's an interesting thing that it wasn't easy for me, but I wouldn't change anything. I have a few moments in my career, like Frank Sinatra says, regrets. I have a few, but too few to mention. I have a few. I was playing with New York, and I got thrown out of an exhibition game against the Flyers. I think if I had stayed in that entire game, they would have had to sign me, because I was playing well, and a couple of the Flyers came after me, and I knocked one flat cold. First minute of the game, and they were looking for a tough guy, and they got Fatiou, and they more than likely needed 2.
Yeah, geez.
But it was a team coached by a guy from Three Rivers, and John-Guy Talbot, and John Ferguson was the general manager, and I guess one American was enough for them. So they took Fatih, which is fine. He was my roommate. He was a great player, lasted a long time. And so I just took my energy and my intentions elsewhere, over to the dark side.
There you go.
Nicky Fatih was the coach of Johnstown when I was down in the East Coast League. And I tell you, he was great to deal with. You know, he was straightforward. And that was one of the things we talked about too. The fighters were always great guys to deal with as referees. Did you find that to be the case?
Well, it was interesting. People have asked me what was the greatest fight or who were the toughest guys. They ask me that quite often. I worked a game in Saskatoon in the Western Hockey League playoffs. And Shane Chirla, who went on and played for Dallas, and he was a tough kid. And Wendell Clark, who played for Toronto and played for Quebec. They had a fight in Saskatoon. The place was packed in the old arena. Wild Bill Hunter was there, and he had owned Edmonton when I played for Edmonton. And those two guys fought, and the two linesmen went to break them in, and I grabbed them both and pulled them back. Get back here. And I said, I'll take care of this. And I leaned in. Those guys were slugging each other. I said, let me know when you're tired. And after about a minute and a half, they looked over at me, and I said, okay, I'm stepping in. And I put my arm across the two and no effort. And I just pulled them apart. I said, let's skate to the box together. And we did. And we skated about 20 feet and maybe 20 feet from the box. I raised both of their hands like champions, and the place went nuts. But there were 3 people in that arena that understood what happened that night. Shane Chirla, Wendell Clark, and Paul Stewart.
Yep.
Because that was probably one of the best displays of toughness and courage and fortitude for their teams. They gave it 100%. So I always had time for those guys. And you know, it's funny, the Bruins had Lyndon Byers, and there was a kid named Wayne Van Dorp, and he was going to take on Byers, and he was going to show him, and he was playing for Quebec, and it was a TV timeout, and they kept jibber-jabbering at each other, and I skated over. I said, you guys going to fight? He said, yeah. I said, well, you're supposed to wait till the TV clock, the light goes off. And I looked at the linesman. I said, drop the puck. He dropped the puck, and Byers hit him with one punch and flat cold. And I helped Van Dorp up because he didn't know whether to wind his watch or head for the corral. So I said to him, do you want to try this again? He just shook his head.
Nope. Now, one thing, and this is a great lead-in. One thing Gino and I talked about before you came on was fighting in hockey. Because the big argument now is, should fighting be banned? Should they take fighting out of hockey? You know, it's our belief that it has a place, it has a purpose, especially back when you played. What's your thoughts on fighting in hockey, and what's the future of it?
Well, I don't think there's any necessary argument that makes hockey any peculiar or any different than baseball or football. I watched the football the other day, and those guys were smashing each other in the head and having to get broken up by the officials and everything. So they have controlled violence. And in baseball, the pitcher throws one a little too close to the guy's chin, and the guy runs out and throws his bat at him, and da-da-da-da-da. And I've often said that if baseball wanted to stop the bench clearing brawls, they would just say any player leaves his position when the pitch was thrown is out. But they don't want to do that because there's a certain aspect to the whole intimidation, the whole aspect of retribution. If you hit one of my guys, they have their own code. And in hockey, I don't think it's necessarily that the players are afraid of the instigator penalty. I think they listen to their agents quite often. And their agents are telling them, if you're in the box for 5 minutes and then another 5 minutes and a third 5 minutes and then you're in the shower, you're not getting any points.
Right.
So you're not getting an extra 100,000 or 200,000 or 500,000 or whatever the numbers are that they're paying. And it's ridiculous money from what I see now, because I see the league pricing themselves out. You know, a guy like the three of us, you know, we have a wife and kids. I mean, we're talking to go to the game and park and get a couple slices of pizza and a couple beers and everything. And
the vacation.
I mean, you're talking $1,000.
Yep.
I can't afford that. So I don't go to the games. And you'd think, when my grandfather retired from the National League in baseball, they gave him a gold pass. He could go to any game. But when they sent me on my road, they gave me a Canadian pension, and that's worth about, I can probably get a ham sandwich, or, you know, if I get a 2-for-1 sale at McDonald's, I'm okay.
You can sneak in that back door at the Garden.
Yeah, well, my days of sneaking in any place are long gone, because I sit there and I watch, and people say to me, "Oh, the Bruins, they're a great team." They are a good team. But why did they get beaten in Florida? And why did they get beaten in St. Louis? Because they're missing something that a Paul Stewart could bring to that team. They're missing size and muscle.
I agree.
And I'm going to tell you right now, if Tkachuk ran my goaltender, he wouldn't get out of the parking lot alive.
and that's what's
that's
missing.
The truth. That's exactly the point we were trying to make. Yeah,
we said, like, no one took runs at Gretzky because they knew McSorley would be coming. And now
I fought Semenko.
Yeah, Semenko too.
Yeah, Semenko's nuts.
Our little friction at times, but they were a true team. And you know, you saw the metamorphosis of the league protecting players after Ronnie Harris hit and body checked him and took his knee out. And then you had Samuelson with Neely. So you see that type of thing started to fade, and nobody grabbed Lemieux, or nobody grabbed Samuelson as they should have. Well, Lemieux took, I think, was a Drake with Detroit, and you know, they finally caught up to him. But I just say that instantaneous retribution isn't there, and people say, well, it's not part of the game, and it's, you know, it's violence and all of that. Listen, I've seen more violence in the parking lot at the mall on Christmas Eve fighting over that last spot to park to make sure you get in before 6 o'clock.
Right.
And you know, the world is violent, and this is controlled mayhem. Yeah, and as I said to Illich one night when he was talking to me, the former owner, the late owner of the Detroit Red Wings, I told him, I said, I'm great for business. His business is Little Caesars Pizza. And I said, I skate on the ice and 40, 50 pizzas get thrown at me, a dozen beers. I mean, your profit margin goes right up. And we were laughing. And I said to him, it's interesting, but I'm going to tell you this. I said, you know, you got a guy like Probert, you know, people pay to watch him, because some guy that's standing on the production line putting a nut on a bolt all day long, and then he has to go home and listen to his wife. He comes to the game and has a couple pops. He sheds all of his frustration and all of his attitude. And, you know, I probably save a lot of marriages, I'm telling you.
So definitely fighting has a place in hockey. That's
you know, the interesting thing, as I say, I was a rainy day at Hummerock Beach. My dad was a high school teacher. They got out in June. So I was born in March. So I was a rainy day at Hummerock. And, and the fact is that you know, I born in 1953, do the math. And the fact is that, you know, I can't do what I used to do. I can't skate like I could. I can't go up the stairs or climb the ladder or bend over as much as easily, or swing the golf club and hit it as far. But that's life, and you learn and you adjust, and you take pride in watching your children do it. My son, Max, you know, he's 6'3", and he hits it 320 off the tee. And, you know, now we got to teach him how to hit 320 without the wedge in his hand. But, it's a funny thing. I watch these games, and I go to the prep games or I go to the college games once in a while, and my instinct is still there, and I still see things, and I still say, oh, I would have done this, or I might have done that, especially when I was after officiating. And I think that my heart's still there, but my body's abandoned it. I haven't got it anymore. But I still look at players and I say to myself, man, I'd take that guy and kick his ass from here to Charlestown.
I love it. And when you were reffing, was there a time, because one time in Richmond, and I don't know if I told the story last episode, but there was a guy, Andrew Shire. He was the captain of Richmond, and a complete little pain in the ass. And he always would chirp and chirp and chirp and all of them. So finally one night I said, listen, I'll take the jersey off. I'll end my career. We'll go to center ice and I'm going to kick your ass. Was there ever a moment that you had that in the NHL?
No, but I was with them one time. He did it to Billy Tibbetts in the Wannabe a Bruin. I was lining.
That's right.
Yes, right? Oh, it was excellent.
I said, you were standing next to me. I said, I think that guy just slashed me.
Yep, and you button hooked, you blew the whistle, and you just go for it.
I went right at him.
That was awesome. He was like, hey.
O'Reilly and Brad Park were
That's right.
coaching, and they were like, go get him, Stu. And, I feel bad for that kid. His father was quite a player at Harvard, and he had, and he still has, an attitude that, people are picking on him. He doesn't realize that, I played it tough. I played it rough, but if I made a mistake, I owned it. If I did something wrong, I owned it. Yeah. And he hasn't quite ever accepted the fact that most of the problems that he's encountered, and I'm not a psychologist, and I really don't like to talk about a lot of other guys, but, he picked the wrong guy to whack with his stick, because I would have killed him. And I don't fight to fight. Nope. And I told a few players in the NHL, a couple guys said to me, if you were a player again, I'd kick the hell out of you. And I said to one guy, there's a 99 in Charlestown, and they got a fenced off area around the dumpster. I said, it's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. I'll meet you there. And whoever leaves first is the winner. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to fight you to win. I'm going to fight to kill you, because I'll lose my job, but I'm going to kill you. And you get me to that point when I was that mad. A guy takes the insulation of being a player and a star player and all that, and thinks he can get away with saying stuff. And occasionally I would say that Andre Savard was coaching Sherbrooke we were in Fredericton one night in the American League. And he had played for Quebec Nordiques. He played for the Bruins. I played against him. And, I'm walking off the ice. I'm under the stands, and he punched me in the chest. And I looked at him, and the linesmen, of course, are trying to hold me back. And I wasn't trying to go at him, but they thought I was going to kill him. I just looked at him. I said, is that the best you've got? I said, for what you're going to spend tonight, you better take another one. Go ahead. and Serge Savard was general manager, and within a week they fired him. Wow. Because that type of conduct is unprofessional, and it's certainly not standard for what Montreal Canadiens stood for at that time. I don't know what they stand for now, but their GM at the time, he fired him. About 2 weeks later, I'm walking through the Zamboni pit to go to my dressing room in Philadelphia, and go in the back door, and you got to walk through the Zamboni pit to get to your dressing room. And Savard's standing there smoking a cigarette. And I said, hey, bonjour, Savard. You're talking to me? I punch you and everything. I said, if you hurt me or you bothered me, I wouldn't be talking to you. It didn't bother me. I said, I'm sorry you lost your job. Good luck next time. To me, it was just part of what I had to do. And I had to occasionally take a punch. And I occasionally had to take crap from people that couldn't carry my jock into the rink. So that's the way it is. But as I said to one guy in a bar not too long ago, who walked up and said, "Yeah, I remember you as a player. You were a pussy. You were a horseshit." I said, "Yeah, thank you very much." I said, "And I own a house on Cape Cod. Thanks for buying those tickets." And he said to me, "Well, you were a worse referee." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Can I use your cell phone?" "For what?" I said, "I got to call those 5 Hall of Fames and tell them they made a mistake." And as far as my speech goes, Rouse,
Yep.
they gave us 10 minutes. And then Red Berenson said in his speech, I'm going to hurry up because everybody wants to hear Paul Stewart. So I'm giving him 5 minutes. So that's 15. And Hago Harrington was dead. So I grabbed his 10. So now I'm up to 25. And my speech was 28 minutes. And I did turn around and ask Steve Levy, "How am I doing for time?" And it was kind of funny because one of the 2 pages of my notes stuck together, and I forgot to thank the fellas from the ECAC that worked for me that had come to the induction in Nashville. And I actually even forgot the commissioner at the time who within 3 months fired me.
Oh, Jesus.
That's okay.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you, because we've talked about this too. So you were a player turned referee. The trend now in the NHL is it's different than when I came up, when Gino came up, Chris Rooney. You'd work the juniors, you'd work the minor pros, you'd, see all the craziness, earn your chops, and then get your chance. Now, it seems like they just pluck players out of the AHL or Europe and put them right in without very little refereeing experience. And it seems like it's really not working.
Well, the judgment of management with the National Hockey League has somewhat been affected by the Paul Stewart experiment. When I came in '83, I called them and asked them, and I had been working Pee Wee and Mite games and some high school and club hockey and such for colleges and such. The State Department had told the NHL they needed to see more Americans. So I fit that category. Next, I had played. And then third, I had the bloodlines. With my grandfather winning a Stanley Cup, with my grandfather reffing in the NHL, my dad reffing all those college games. My dad refereed Dryden's games and, BU and all those great teams. And so, as John McCauley said, I had the bloodlines. And subsequently, Brian Murphy had played some hockey at UNH, not on the varsity, but he was a goaltender, and he came in as a linesman. And a lot of the guys had played a bit of junior. But they force-fed me. One year, I worked 146 games.
Wow.
I worked 37 games in 39 nights. And I worked in 5 different leagues on that road trip with 5 different sets of rules. So I was an experiment, and I think I panned out okay. And subsequently, because of there's another aspect of why they're taking these guys and force feeding them. They don't have 16 teams like I had when I broke in. They have 32 teams or 31 teams. And, they need the geographical coverage. So they have people from all over. It's still 90% Canadian. Although I brought over a Russian and he did well, but they never coached him.
I worked with him. Yep.
Yeah, they didn't help him. And I don't really care what they think, but that's my opinion. And now they're taking guys that have played in the Eastern League and others. And it sort of shuts down the whole aspect of the referee development program that USA Hockey was trying to instill and get going, because they feel that because the player played in the minors, and there are a couple on the staff that have played and now working full time, that a guy like Wes McCauley played at Michigan State, and you look at other different guys, and that learning curve is shorter. You played in Rhode Island.
Yep, Salve Regina.
And I was there at the Gridiron Club when you got the award for your.
That's right.
It belies what people think, that I had too many games without my helmet. I remember a lot of stuff, and because it's my life and it's memorable to me and people I care about. So the aspect of what they're doing now is they're trying to fill the gaps, and I liken it to what the Army Air Corps did when they took a guy like Jimmy Stewart, who was overage when he joined, but he was a pilot with 2,000 hours. And he ended up as a brigadier general and flew 20 missions in a B-24, maybe more. Some he didn't even count. And I just think that, because these guys have had the playing experience and they've played college or major junior or some in the American League, that the National League is betting on the curvature and the numbers, that their learning curve is going to be smaller, and the numbers, if they get more ex-players. And you got to remember, the guys in the minors aren't making the money that these guys are making in the National League. National League, you start out, you're making $850. Well, if you start out as a referee in the NHL, you're making $160, $180, $180, or close to $200,000, all said and done. First year, that's pretty good money for a kid that's like 23. So you have to take a crap load of abuse, but who cares?
Right.
As I said to Mike Keenan one night, who told me in St. Louis, I stood in front of the bench and he had just taken over, and Gretzky's playing and Brett Hull's on the team, and he's standing there, and I had him in Boston, I had him in Chicago, and I had him with the Canada Cup. He said I put my hand up for a line change, and Keenan's behind the bench, and I point to him. I go, "You want to change?" He's home team. And he goes, "Screw you." I skated over. I said, "What?" He goes, "Screw you." I'm taking the color out of this one.
You don't have to.
Yeah, well, I have my own code of dignity, and the fact is that I turned. I said, "Didn't you go to St. Lawrence? They teach you to talk like that up there? I know your roommate. He told me you were a nice Canadian guy that could play the guitar." I said, "Now you're swearing at me in St. Louis?" He says, "You know what? You're a no good lollipop sucker." I said, "Really?" I said, "Well, I take exception to that. I am a great lollipop sucker. Ask Brett Hull." Well, Keenan laughed so hard that he could not keep a straight face. He turned and went up the runway behind the bench, and he was laughing so hard. And I looked down in the runway, and I got my arms folded like this, and he nodded. He gave me the nod.
That's pretty good.
I got you. And when he came back, I said, "I know what you're trying to do. You got some cougar's phone number. You want to get out of here early."
He wanted to get
Ain't happening. I never took it personally. And it's one of the things I try to teach my young officials.
Yep.
Go to the game, put your stuff on, go do the game, leave.
Right.
They're going to call you everything in the book. Water off the duck's ass. See you later. Let it go.
And that's the problem with society. It's everybody's like taking it personally. They got to address it. Everybody's just kind of up in arms now about it.
Everyone gets offended so easy. I think that's part of society's problem. I mean, being a comedian.
If there was HR on the rink, I'm going to tell you something. If there was HR on the rink, there wouldn't be one player and one coach left.
Agreed.
Because they all say stupid stuff.
Yep.
And they all do stupid stuff. And, the only thing that I find offensive is, like making it personal.
Yep.
If a guy happens to, or a player, man or woman, happens to be alternative lifestyle, like, or Russian or French or an American or a college guy, I heard it all. And I never put up with that, because I'd tell them, Like they'd say, oh, he's a fag, he's a college guy. I'd say, I'm a college guy. You think you'd like to try me on? Would you like to try me on? And I'd look at him, and I don't blink. Putin said that. I told Secretary of State John Kerry. I said he was on it. They came over and they were having talks, and I was running the KHL, and I had a game set up with the Russian security guys to deal with their president and their premier and all those fellas. And they all played hockey. They all had their own rinks in their homes, in their castles and mansions. And I said to John Kerry, because he played, we would set up a game with our Secret Service guys, our union, our ambassador, the ambassador's Secret Service. And I told Kerry, I said, you deal with Putin, you got to do this. Look straight ahead at him. Don't blink. Don't look down. Don't look right. Don't look left. Don't fidget. Just look straight at him and smile. Keep him guessing.
That's awesome. How crazy was that league? Because some people tell stories that are just, it was out of control.
Well, how I ended up there, and I was running the ISL at the time, 2 leagues, boys and girls. I was handling the ECAC, and I was men and women, and I had a lot of irons in the fire. And it was interesting because I had the KHL and I had to live there. But I got a call from Fetisov, who had been the captain of the Canada Cup team. And he said to me, we had a meeting at the Kremlin, and Tretiak, Minister of Sport, and Larionov, it was all Yakushev, all the legendary guys with Putin. And they want to have you come over. I said, okay. So I got on a plane and I went over. And they explained to me that the problem with the league was that because they had 31 teams, that the oligarchs that owned the teams, they were getting to the refs and bribing them and paying them. And, it was always a rumor but I caught a couple guys, and I had unlimited power. Plus I had a bodyguard and a chauffeur and a beautiful secretary that helped me, interpreter and such. And they brought me because they knew I was tough, and they knew I didn't care, and they knew I wouldn't back down from anybody. So I had my run-ins with a few people over there, but as I said before, friction's part of hockey. They found out. And the only reason I came home, and they offered me another contract, and they still talk to me. The only reason I came home was I had a brain tumor and I lost the sight in my left eye, and I was afraid I was dying again. So I came home to have an operation. And after 3 years of being there for like 10 months a year, I missed out on my kids. I missed out on my wife. I missed out on my home, playing golf at the golf course on the Cape. And I just said, I've had enough. So, and they offered me big money, but every once in a while you got to say, it's time to pass the torch, Well,
just to say you sat in a room with Putin and all those legendary Russian hockey players. That's a pretty cool story.
Well, it's not bad for a kid from Dorchester, Lowell Mills, St. Gregory's,
right.
that I had achieved that type of dignity and status with those folks, and as well in the other countries that I went to, Slovakia and the Czech Republic and Finland and Sweden and other places. They knew me, and in fact, I'm not bragging, but they considered me an icon type of guy. And, I always, when I went there, I never chased any women, which, everybody says Trump went over there and all this stuff went on and everything. Never happened. I found the Russian people to be, very, very close with their family, their kids. And over there, they don't have any breathalyzer test or anything like that. If they think you drank, they arrest you and you're gone. They take you to jail. They don't have a trial. They just, boom. They'll do a blood alcohol on you. That's it. You have one drink, you lose your car, and you go to jail. And that's just the way it is over there, because they've lost so many people because of drunk driving. I mean, a whole flock of kids walking through Red Square, tourists, got killed by a drunk driver. So, you know, in many ways, some of the things that they did were a little different, but, you know, they really only came around the corner to modern living after 1990. You know, the Soviet Union stopped being the Soviet Union, 91, actually. And I refereed the last game that the Russians played as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
The USSR. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I had great mentors with my grandfather and my father. And I had great mentors with John McCauley and Scotty Morrison and Frank Advari and a lot of the people that helped me along the way. And I tell people this all the time. You know, I may have issues or differences with the people in the National League. The guy that's the charge of hockey operations absolutely despises me, hates me. And he took me off ESPN. He took me off the Bruins broadcast. And he's a you know, I can't say anything without sounding crass, but he's not my cup of tea. And I fought him twice when we played against each other. I told him, why don't you go get a stepladder when you're taller, right? It'll be a better fight. It'll be a fair fight. He probably didn't like that.
You think that has something to do with it?
Maybe. I rope-a-doped him in Pittsburgh one night and another time in Edmonton.
That's outstanding.
That's excellent.
Well, Paul, we could go on and on all night. I mean, you're a fascinating guy. You're an inspiration to a lot of people, not just in hockey, but with, you know, you're a cancer survivor and you do so much charity work. And there's just...
I don't consider it charity and I don't consider it work. I consider it sharing my life. And I feel the responsibility that I have had since 1998 when they told me I was going to die, that the reason I've gotten these 25 years since has been that God has decided that I'm more valuable here than I am in West Roxbury under that 6 feet of dirt. And it may sound presumptuous and pompous, but it's a responsibility that I take seriously, because when you have a bit of fame, it helps open the doors to do things. And when you have the opportunity to do things and help people who may not have had the great parents that I had or the great friends that I've had, then you are doomed to go to hell. So I just want to make sure, and there's one other thing I know, if I had left in the times that I had faced health challenges, whether it was 25 years ago or a couple years ago, they thought I had pancreatic cancer. You deal with stuff. I'm not afraid, and I've never been afraid. And I've never been afraid of anybody to put on a pair of skates at all. I'm still not afraid. And I can tell you this right now. I just didn't want to get to the gates and have St. Peter say, you'll have to stand over there. We're not quite ready for you. We don't have a spot.
You needed to get a few more years in a good deeds, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know, I think, you know, we all have destiny and we all have our missions in life. And every day I wake up, I just try to do a good job and do the best I can to take care of my family and help my friends work together. My career on the ice is over, but I still have a vault of knowledge in my head and I can still help kids. And if I can do that, you know, mention my 2 books. You Want to Go. I sat and signed a whole bunch of them the other day at a card show. I also signed a bunch of my children's books, and the profit from that goes to buy skates for inner city youth.
It's excellent.
Because if they can find a pair of skates and they can do what I did, maybe they'll have a life and we won't be seeing them at Cedar Junction, state prison.
Very
We're
good.
doing drugs on Cass and Mass. And I think there, but for the grace of God, go I.
Right
It's
on.
been fun talking to you guys.
It's been great, Stu.
It's been awesome. And we really appreciate you coming on. And you were definitely the right first guest for Chirping Zebras.
Absolutely.
Well, I was a pretty good chirper in my time.
Yeah, you were. Still are.
I didn't talk much on the ice when I was playing against them. They'd say to me, "I'm going to kick your ass," and I'd say, "Okay."
Good luck.
You let those big hands do the talking.
Exactly.
I love it.
It's funny.
Love it.
And I wore my best teeth tonight, man.
Everyone appreciates that.
This is a funny story, and it's about a Southie guy. Johnny Cuniff was coaching the Cape Cod Freedoms.
I played with his son at Curry.
And I had a house down here, 4 bedrooms. He had 4 children, and he used to drive back and forth to take care of the sporting goods store on Broadway. And he'd come down for the morning skate and drive back and then get the kids and drive back for the game. I said to him, "Hey, Cunny, here's the deal. Don't come down for the morning skate. I'll run the morning skate. It's not that diabolically treacherous. Not a problem." I said, "You bring the kids down. You get out of school at 3. Bring them down. They can go to the game, and then you guys can stay at my house. It's 4 bedrooms, 2 for the girls, 2 for the boys, 1 for you, and I have mine. 4 bedrooms. When the game's over, we'll get some food. We'll watch TV and light a fire, and then the next day we'll get up, we'll have breakfast, we'll go skate and play the game, and then you guys can stay over Saturday night and go home Sunday." He's like, "Oh, that's a lot." I said to him, "No problem." So the game's over, and I got the kids pizza and Coke, and they're sitting in the kitchen with the TV watching, and we're in the living room with a fire going, and we're eating Chinese food, and I had the ribs and the wings. So in order to eat them, I had to take my teeth out. So I put them in a napkin, and I put them on the coffee table. And it's a nice night, and the fire's going, the Bruins are on, they're playing out west, and it's a late game, and we're watching the game, and listening to Johnny Cuniff is like listening to Sigmund Freud and Albert Einstein all at once. He's got it all figured out. He's got the mental part and the physics of it. And the kids called, "Can we get some more Coke?" So I get up and I go in and get him the soda, and I come back, and the paper plates are all gone, and the napkins are all gone, and the Chinese food's all boxed up. And so I said, "Kenny, did you clean up?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "I left a paper napkin right here on the coffee table. Where is it?" He says, "Oh, I took all that stuff and threw it in the fire." My teeth went up the chimney. I'm walking around for the next 10 days with no teeth.
That's excellent.
Well, that's Southie Dorchester right there, right? You sure that was a mistake?
That's pretty good.
My book now is called You Want to Go, and I sat and signed books the other day with Terry O'Reilly. He wrote the foreword of my book, and he was the guy I fought. And I told him, if not once, many times, that if it wasn't for him, he put me on the map. You fight Terry O'Reilly, and you fight Stan Jonathan and Al Secord and Cashman and Wensink. The word spreads. So the night after that game in Boston, we got on a plane and went back to Quebec. And the next game we played Washington Caps. And after Butch Bouchard had fought and not done well with Jonathan, he got traded to Washington. So I'm skating around the ice in Quebec, and Washington skating around their end for the warm-up. And I'm standing there, and I'm not facing Washington. I feel a tap on the back, and I turn and I look. It's Butch Bouchard, who got pretty well beat up by Jonathan. And he said, in his best English, "Paul, I see you have the fight with Stan Jonathan the other night." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You did pretty good. I guess I owe you a beer."
Did you ever fight him?
Oh, yeah. but there's that unspoken code
Oh yeah.
of that respect. And to me, my journey through life in hockey has been about trying to earn that respect. And now that I have it, it's trying to keep it.
Well, right, you've earned it, and you have it.
I appreciate it.
Especially from these two zebras.
I wish you all well.
I wish you well.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Likewise, Happy New Year.
Bye now.
All
I have my sweater on. I have
my
Hall of Fame sweater on.
I love it. Awesome. Thanks,
That's
Stu.
Awesome. All right, Stu, you have a good one.
You're the best.
Bye now.
Bye.
Well, that was quite an interview there. And Paul Stewart, what a dynamic guy.
He's big personality, like just full life, a lot of big heart. Like whenever I always describe Paul, I always say big personality, big heart. Yep. And, he'll do anything for you. And
well, he was I think the perfect first guest on Chirping Zebras. And we're going to have a lot more coming up. Maybe not quite as colorful as him, but we have plenty planned coming up for future episodes. So we want to thank you for joining us. Again, we want to thank our sponsors, Moby Cuts, our favorite barbershop, and also Referees Crease, and the premier assigner of officials and officiating development. And I think that's going to be a wrap. I had a blast tonight.
Yeah, tonight was great. I mean, it was good just to get a guest on, right?
Yeah.
Instead of me and you just yapping. And,
well, we're pretty good at that.
Yeah.
Don't sell ourselves short.
Tremendous slouch.
All right, we'll see you next time.
All right.
Right here on Chirping Zebras.